What if you took a story based in the Old West, where you play as an outlaw who's just doing his iconic one last job before he calls it quits and lives a normal life after fleeing to Mexico? But instead of keeping that story in the traditional Old West, making it more of a horror game with gothic horror and steampunk aesthetics, and of course, ancient vampires, a monster hunting secret organization, and plenty of adult violence and themes thrown into the mix.
Fucking stop with the booba! It's always fucking
Well,
booba!
then it sounds to me like you have Darkwatch. Darkwatch was released in 2005 for the Xbox and PlayStation 2, developed by High Moon Studios and published by Capcom, in North America at least. Ubisoft handled the publishing in Europe and Australia. Plenty of people have mentioned Darkwatch in the comments of previous Western games that I've covered, and it's definitely a game that has a solid cult following, so I decided to give the game a look in 2022 to see how it stands up 17 years after it was released. The art style is badass, the gameplay is a ton of fun, and the story, well, is good enough for a first-person shooter. There are a few problems with the game, but we can talk about all that right now, so today, let's jump into Darkwatch, Curse of the West. Let's do a little refresher for those who may have forgotten, or a spoiler-free intro for those who don't know. Welcome to the Wild West. Circa 1876, you are Jericho Cross, an outlaw looking for a big score in a train carrying what you think is gold and riches. Unknown to you, this train belongs to the Darkwatch, an ancient organization committed to defeating supernatural evils. The cargo of this train is not money or jewels, but instead, it's a captured vampire lord being transported by the Darkwatch named Lazarus. You reach what you think is a vault full of gold doubloons and release the most powerful vampire in existence from captivity. Lazarus, being a good old chap, doesn't kill you when you do so. As a thank you, he just bites you, so you slowly turn into a vampire yourself. With growing supernatural powers, you hunt down Lazarus throughout the game in an attempt to remove his curse. And if you kill him, you gain your soul back, and if not, it's not just you who suffers, but the entire region that Lazarus now resides in. Arizona. Chaos, havoc, and evil vampiric rule over all, dead or alive. Now that we know what we're jumping into, let's talk about the development process and all the hurdles that need to be jumped to get this game out in its final form. High Moon Studios was formerly known as Sammy Entertainment and was the American arm under Japanese game publisher Sammy to develop and publish games in North America. In 2004, Sammy merged with Sega to form Sega Sammy Holdings and discontinued all of its video game development in Western markets to focus on its Japanese products. So this was the brief end of Sammy Entertainment before they became independent in order to focus solely on video game development, renaming themselves to High Moon Studios. The first thing they decided to do was to start work again on a game that they were already in progress with as Sammy Entertainment before it was all scrapped. That game being Darkwatch. Initially, the idea came up for the game after discussing the market of first-person shooters, being bloated by various different sci-fi, fantasy, and military themes. The team landed on a Western game, but they wanted to introduce something unique to make it stand out even more. And there's nothing really more unique than vampires, I guess. But at first, the vampires weren't anything like they ended up in the final game. In fact, the project as a whole was entirely different. It was at first a game described as something you would see made by Pixar, with vampires that felt cartoonish, and the main character being a bumbling comic relief, who was described as a sort of card cheat similar to Brett Maverick. His conceptual name was Chaz Bartlett. These concepts were all what was cooking when Sammy was briefly in the works under Sega, so it's not really surprising that the game was lighthearted and cartoonish. Luckily for us, after the game was scrapped, along with Sammy Entertainment as a whole, High Moon had the chance to look at the themes without any publishers breathing down their necks. They started by taking the same Western and vampire tale, but making it feel more like Blade meets Men in Black, set in the Old West. Sort of dark content, light horror with a slapstick feel to it, but eventually it grew even darker than Blade, and it lost all the tongue-in-cheek feel of Men in Black. It was actually the final iteration of the protagonist that really turned the tone of the game though. The character, now named Jericho Cross, was a brooding figure and begged to be put into a game with a mature theme. One look at this dude and you can't help but say, yeah, he's gonna be lopping heads off with a bladed butt of a shotgun. Thematically, this game borrowed a lot from films, comics, and games that featured darker Western tones, with games like Deadlands and Blood, comics like Jonah Hex and Vampire Hunter D, and movies like Silverado, all being pretty large inspirations on the core concepts of the plot. Gameplay-wise, the team obviously took inspiration from plenty of shooters, but it's really not hard to see some specific examples to compare to when you look at the final product. Games like Half-Life, Halo, Medal of Honor, Metroid Prime, and Time Splitters, all games that were monumental in their own right. The developers had love and respect for all of them, but most importantly, they took aspects of each to make some baller-ass gameplay in Darkwatch. One of the main characters, Tala, was originally meant to be a player character as well in the story, but the studio's marketing department didn't think that would fly, whatever the fuck that means, so it's Jericho that takes the lead as the solo protagonist. The game was always meant to be a console shooter though, with development primarily focused on PlayStation 2 and Xbox because High Moon thought that consoles were the future of the FPS genre, and at the time it's easy to understand why. Although this unfortunately meant that any PC port was put on the back burner, which ultimately led to it never existing at all. Versions were also in the talks for the GameCube and the PSP, but like the Vampire Lord himself, never saw the light of day. It's very clear the devs were passionate about this game. Every little thing was meticulously designed and often had inspirations from stuff that they truly enjoyed themselves. Boss fights were inspired by all the fun that they had playing against crazy bosses in the Metal Slug series. For the title track, they licensed the main theme from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly and remixed it to fit the horror feel of the game, with the rest of the soundtrack being original and composed by Mike Regan, who is known now for his work on the God of War franchise, and Astru Sierra, frontman for the band Ozymandias. The tracks weren't made just to be dark Western bangers, even though they were, but they wanted to make the audience connect with Jericho, who is a conflicted character, often torn between doing good and being bad. But in a first-person shooter game like this, I personally don't derive any storytelling from the music. It either slaps or it doesn't while I'm killing bad guys, and in this case, I can say it slaps hard. The intro cinematic of the game was made by Kyle Cooper, who has done animation work before on video games with the likes of Hideo Kojima on Snake Eater and Sons of Liberty. Darkwatch was mostly completed and unveiled in January of 2004, showing off its playable multiplayer deathmatch mode and announced that it was ready for release late in the same year. However, the whole stink with Sammy and Sega left the game in limbo. Still being worked on and perfected by now independent High Moon Studios, it wasn't until May of 2005 that they found a publisher for the game with Capcom, finally releasing the game to the public in August of 2005 in North America, Ubisoft getting the game out in Europe and Australia in October. Upon release, Capcom went crazy with the marketing for this game. There were TV commercials, radio ads, they put ads in any magazine with a gaming focus or a primarily male audience. They even put the game's characters and animations on MTV's Video Mods, where they performed Good Charlotte's song Predictable. Talk about the mid-2000s. With all the struggles of the game to be released and all the care from High Moon put into making this rock-solid project, and Capcom promoting the ever-loving shit out of it, let's get into the game itself and talk about some gameplay. But before we talk about some gameplay, let's just take a minute to thank the sponsor of today's video, Skillshare. Skillshare is a service that I've used for years now. It's been an invaluable thing for me, especially in regards to making this channel. I've learned essentially everything I know about video editing, thumbnail design, and even recording my voice from lessons on Skillshare. But it goes beyond that. Even more recently, I've gotten to courses like Marques Brownlee's YouTube Success series, where he goes over his process of making his videos and how he grows with each one that he does. But of course, Skillshare is not just for YouTubers. There's thousands of courses on here, everything from photography to baking to Excel spreadsheets and meditation. No lie, I started this one a few days ago, and even though it's something that I never really had an interest in, I'm learning so much, and I've actually been using the ideas that Justin talks about. If there's a creative pursuit or skill that you're interested in, Skillshare probably has a course for it. Skillshare can make 2022 a year of the new you. New skills, new personal growth, and new ideas and connections through creativity. So join today. The first 1,000 people to use the link in the description or use my code YT MrHammers1MON will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. That's a whole month to dabble in a few courses and find out if it's a fit for you, so take advantage of it. Thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to Darkwatch. Overall, Darkwatch is a satisfying first-person shooter that feels a lot like Cowboy Halo. And in regards to Halo, I will compare this game to it often because it's really a shameless copycat of everything the developers loved about that game. And I'm not knocking that choice to copy the combat aspects of one of the best console shooters of all time, but when it's this blatantly obvious, it deserves a mention. I mean, even one of the control schemes for the game is titled Chieftain, and it rips the default controls from Halo. Jericho Cross moves around a lot like old Master Chief, especially in regards to the floaty ass double jump in the game. A jump that makes you feel weightless, although in this game it's impossible to land where you intend with it. That floaty double jump is one of the nifty things that you can do as a new vampire recruit. You also get a neat little red eye that works as a type of X-ray vision, except blood red colored of course. You gotta fit the themes in. But the X-ray vision highlights enemies and various items around the levels that you may find necessary to continue on your way. You also get a double health bar of sorts, with the top bar being a replenishing shield very similar to Halo, and the bottom bar being actual health, replenished by the blood of the deceased around you. There is a standard amount of weapon variety when it comes to an FPS title. I actually found the need to switch up my weapons often to fit different situations, something that I don't do very often. I usually grab the best shotgun or assault rifle available and never switch guns in any game. But in this game, I use the carbine to take out the perched snipers from afar. The shotgun is essential in taking out some of these skelly boys that swarm you with scythes and cleavers, and even the starter pistol, the Redeemer, holds its own in many battles, being able to hold like 24 bullets, and Jericho is able to pull off the western trope of fanning the hammer, spamming those bullets into some poor soul, putting down even the toughest foes. It's super satisfying, but even more satisfying is the melee hits, another thing that reminded me a lot of Halo, but that's okay. My favorite weapon in the game was the rocket launcher, but not even because of the rockets, which were dope and all on their own, but because of the melee hits with it. You flip the damn rocket launcher over and use it as a warhammer, and you know, I got a thing for hammers. The combat feels a lot like Doom in a way, especially with the shotgun ripping apart enemies and brutal melee hits leaving viscera in the air. As you run around, it's just a constant carnage in your wake. The gore is definitely not held back at all. Being a one-man weapon of mass destruction is rewarded as well though, with the two-tiered health and shield bar. You get your blood shield back relatively quick, while being in the vicinity of where your enemy dies immediately replenishes your health due to healing off the blood that they drop. The blood not only quenches your vampiric thirst, but also charges up your ability to use special moves on the dance floor, and we'll get to those in just a second though. The enemy designs are really well done and fit the fantastic aesthetic this game has going, with the overarching theme and the weapons and the level design. There are generic skeleton boys poking around every corner of the game, but there's also some really cool enemies like the Banditos and the Reapers that truly stand out. The enemies are also pretty reactive to what you're doing. They will yell out dynamite and take cover after throwing a stick at them. They duck and cover when you fire explosive crossbow bolts nearby, or run in panic if you happen to sink one into them, or just run straight at you, bringing the explosive back to hurt you. The gunslingers keep their distance while the melee dudes rush at you, and the sniper boys are usually perched in a pretty great position, not allowing you to take them out easily unless you have a carbine or sniper yourself. The Banditos charge at you with a shotgun that does massive damage, and the Banshees are bullet sponges even on the easiest difficulty with high damage projectiles, unless you hit them in the head, which seems to be an instant kill, taking it right off their shoulders with a little bit of cervical spine still attached to it. The upscaler I have for my PS2 is ass, so until I get a new one, I'm playing a lot of these games on an emulator, and this game was not a great time for me personally, at least at first. I suck at using a controller for FPS games, and even using LilyPad with mouse controls, I couldn't quite get it to run seamlessly, but we got the job done. Just know if you see some crazy aiming or weird stuff going on in the clips, this is why. It was mainly the fast-paced nature of this game that made me wish that it was made for the PC, especially the floaty jump and the twitchy reaction needed to kill most enemies. It was just really hard to get the crosshairs where I needed them, but in reality, I pick up a controller to play games like once a year, and those games are usually not first-person shooters, so I just suck regardless. I used to be so good at Modern Warfare 2 on the 360, I have no idea what happened to me. Combined with the fast-paced gameplay and demon slaying, there is a rudimentary good and evil morality system in the game. At several points you get an option to drain souls or kill innocent people, and the game reflects your choices in the final moments of the game, whether you stayed on the path or good, or let your vampiric desires take over. Like I briefly mentioned earlier, there's also some abilities that you get throughout the game that are different depending on which morality side you fall onto. Similar to the beast form and the suffering ties that bind, your vampiric abilities reflect your morality. Good abilities typically enhance your existing attacks or defense, giving you things like silver bullets, which increase bullet damage and burns the undead, and mystic armor, which gives you increased damage resistance, but also you can fear enemies for a short amount of time, weaker enemies at least. It doesn't work on the stronger foes, and the distinction of when it will work and when it will not work is pretty unclear, so I don't even know if I really use this one all that much. And the ultimate good power is a bolt of lightning that chains throughout your enemies. The evil powers aren't quite as good as the good ones, at least the initial ones. I did an evil run for my first playthrough, and while the abilities are fun, the good powers are objectively better. Evil powers include Blood Frenzy, which gives you increased movement and melee damage. Turn makes enemies work for you momentarily, an ability that sounds really good on paper, but it doesn't really work that well in the game. They usually just stand there confused instead of attacking others like they should. Black Shroud is probably the best one, giving you an armor boost, and also damages enemies that touch you. And the ultimate evil ability is the power to steal souls from distant enemies and gives you their health once they die, making giant swarms of enemies pretty easy work. The cool thing about the morality system is you aren't tied to one. You can do some good and you can do some bad, and dabble in both and get the early abilities from both, but without committing to one side or another, you won't be able to use either ultimate power, be it the Lightning or the Soul Stealer 9000. Some levels in the game offer a variation of gameplay, so it's not just levels of arena shooting back to back. You have some levels on horseback with the really cool mechanic of going side saddle and using your undead horse as a shield of sorts. There's also some levels where you can control vehicles. You get this thing that is essentially a warthog from Halo to drive around and dodge demons on a turret, and TNT toting baddies. There's also sections where you just shoot a turret. I don't know why this is always a thing that games do. Who wants to just sit on a turret and shoot down waves of enemies when 5 seconds ago I was a vampire double jumping and dropping warhammers on some Scully boys. There's also the crappy level where you're stuck out in the daylight, and being a vampire, you aren't too happy about it, losing all of your vampire abilities like your blood shield and your x-ray vision. There was apparently a decent multiplayer in this game as well, both co-op campaign and online, but since I played this on an emulator, I obviously didn't check it out, and it seems like the typical multiplayer of the time though, arena-based deathmatches ripping off Halo. Overall, the gameplay is a generic shooter that heavily rips off of Halo, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't enjoy this combination of cool gun concepts, awesome enemies, and gruesome melee hits more than a lot of shooters that came out the same year. The combat is just so satisfying, but it still doesn't stop the game from dragging on, especially after fighting the big boss and having more waves of enemies to deal with even after that. But before we spoil too much, let's get into the plot of Darkwatch. As all my retrospectives go, this is an in-depth summary and analysis of the plot of the game, and if you don't want any spoilers, feel free to skip ahead to the next chapter. So, here we go. The game starts with an outlaw, Jericho Cross, boarding a suspiciously armored train in order to score big and change his life around for the better. This is the infamous one last job. You know, the last job that every bank robber, outlaw, or drug smuggling movie is based on. Jericho gets on this train and it's immediately apparent that something fucky is going on. There are horse corpses strewn about, sketchy turrets and cannons, and eventually you find a skeleton gnawing on some dude's xiphoid process. But that doesn't stop Jericho from getting to that vault that's surely full of gold and treasure. He places his dynamite and gets ready to blow it down when a lady walks up and tries to stop you from being idiotic. This is Cassidy Sharp, a Darkwatch agent that knows what's in the vault. She's voiced by Jennifer Hale. You may know her as Commander Shepard from the Mass Effect series. Jericho doesn't listen to her though, and blows the charge anyway, releasing Vampire Lord Lazarus Malkoth, whose roar wakes up the dead for miles. He leaps on Cassidy, but Jericho's minuscule attempt at putting him down makes him turn his fangs on the outlaw, saving Cassidy, for now, but in return becoming one under Lazarus's curse, a vampire. Jericho wakes up to Cassidy killing a few more stragglers before they get on top of the train and have a little shootout with Lazarus. They do little more than amuse him though, making him laugh with triumphant laughter that swells to over-the-top laughter. Wow, what a subtitle. Jericho blows some conveniently placed TNT on the train to separate himself from Lazarus, allowing himself and Cassidy to make an escape, right before Jericho uncontrollably lunges at his horse, feeding on its blood. Sad day for the horse. But he does turn into a cool undead vampire demon horse thing, so that's neat. Cassidy and Jericho ride to what Cassidy calls the Darkwatch outpost, but Lazarus isn't done messing with him, so they shoot it out a little bit more until he gets bored and summons what I thought was a graphical glitch on my emulator to make his exit. Cassidy and Jericho arrive at a cemetery that I guess is blocking their way to the outpost because they ditch their horses and attempt to cross it on foot. They obliterate every lost soul that decided they didn't want to stay in their grave before opening the crypt door, where Cassidy leaves Jericho to go alone, saying that she'll meet him on the other side. Like, why can't you just take Jericho around with you as well? Why you gotta send him down in the darkness? Anyway, Jericho goes through the crypt and meets a new type of enemy that is a whole lot of fun, before he makes his way to the other side of the graveyard and finds some lady stumbling up to him, giving him his first morality ultimatum. She's infected by Lazarus. You can either purge her soul by sucking and spitting on her bite like a snake wound, or you can suck her soul dry and take her life, giving you your first vampire ability depending on what morality decision you made. Right before the introduction of another new enemy and several waves of bony boys and flying broads coming at you to take you down. After slaughtering them all, you meet up with Cassidy, who shows you a hidden tomb to pass through, failing to mention the giant cross on top of it that burns Jericho, who is now a heathen. Before she can feel too bad about it though, Lazarus shows up and one-handedly squeezes her head off of her shoulders. Just straight basketball palm that shit. He calls you a little bitch for getting burned by the cross and says that you've been chosen, but doesn't tell you what for. He then tosses you into the passageway and then throws Cassidy's body right behind you, where you get your second morality decision, to feed or not to feed from the bloody stump of Cassidy's neck. Jericho makes his way through this underground mineshaft, battling plenty of shooty boys and bony boys, and some of them even have TNT now, so that's a lot of fun. Upon exiting, he meets up with the ghost of Cassidy. She's naked now. She offers to continue to help Jericho get to Darkwatch, like a naked Cortana from Halo. Cassidy guides Jericho to the outpost of Darkwatch that is seemingly overrun by the undead. Plenty of enemies and another morality decision all lie in wait before Jericho makes it around to the other side, summoning his demon vampire horse from thin air and riding out to the Citadel, the home of the Darkwatch. Casually blowing up an armored train car along the way, Jericho rides like hell to get to the Citadel before the sun comes up, because you know, vampires don't like sun. Showing up isn't all peaches and cream though. Jericho is promptly shot by Commander Clay because he knows Jericho is responsible for Cassidy's death, and he wants to torture him. The torture maze is something that all new recruits go through in order to join the ranks of Darkwatch. However, Clay has made this trial so that Jericho won't survive. However, Jericho still makes it through, so Clay has no choice but to let Jericho into the Darkwatch, but not before being all macho in front of Jericho one last time.
Make yourself useful, and I'll let you live.
All said and done, you get a new outfit, you get access to an armory, and a new partner, Tala. She's a leather-clad, big-breasted seductress that totally seems like she's fighting the good fight.
Giddy up, cowboy. My name's Tala. Let's mount up.
She's voiced by Rose McGowan, who you may know as the girl in Death Proof who forgot to wear her seatbelt. You also get access to select your own missions moving forward. There's really only 3 of them to choose which order that you do them in, so it's really nothing crazy. The first mission leads you and Tala and some other Darkwatch peoples to a town of sorts where Darkwatch regulators have gone missing. They are there to find them, or at least find what killed them. There are several marks here that need to be destroyed, clearing the small town of tainted blood and letting Jericho continue with his missions. There's various missions to choose from to do next. None of them are really substantial. You got a car mission, you got a mission to find an object called the Deadlight Prism that lets vampires walk in the sunlight. Unfortunately, this mission takes place in the sunlight. And another mission has you going to the tribe of Native Americans to defend them from the rising undead. This mission has a huge brawl at the end with constant waves of enemies to fight. It's good fun. After these small missions, it's back to the main plot-oriented missions, with the next one being Jericho and Tala going to a town called Hangtown that is overrun with the undead. Tala wants to simply destroy the whole town, which I guess is one way to handle this problem. Before heading out the ghost door to start the mission, a butcher busts in and leads by example in showing just why there's 2 giant turrets aimed at the door at all times. Arriving at Hangtown reveals that Tala is allowing the regulators to just kill innocent people under her watch, executing them. Jericho just goes with the flow, to the disgust of Ghost Cassidy, but there's not much he can really do. As expected, there's tons of enemies and destruction in the town. Regulators still going wild with their rampage on innocents and ghouls alike, definitely making a home of the place. Eventually you meet up with Tala. She tells you people are hiding in the church and wants you to meet her there, and then runs away with the goofiest little run. Arriving at the church and killing the monsters reveals that all the people have already been slaughtered. Commander Clay is rightfully pissed, but Tala doesn't seem to really care. In fact, she takes this time out to show her appreciation for Jericho's hard work in one of the weirdest sex scenes ever made in a video game. In the middle of it, she cuts her own neck in order to have Jericho bite her. Clearly, she wants some of that vampire blood. Either that, or she just reads a lot of Twilight. The morning after this steamy scene is chaos. Tala opens the gates of the Citadel to Lazarus, and he's leading a charge on the Darkwatch turf. You find Tala popping off regulators left and right, flexing her new vampire skills and feasting away at the bodies, before telling Jericho that she played him, and just used him in order to get Lazarus's curse.
I played you, Jericho, and you gave me what I wanted.
Jericho fights his way through the Citadel in order to stop Lazarus, and specifically stop him from taking the Dark Light Prism, granting him great power and immunity to sunlight. Jericho arrives to find Lazarus just before he grabs the prism, and it's a tad too late. But it results in the final showdown of the two regardless, and of course Jericho wins. But the boss fight isn't simply the end of the game here. The story actually forks here depending on whether you chose the good path or the evil path. Oddly enough, it doesn't seem to matter which path you've taken throughout the course of the game up to this point, you still get to make the decision here independent of all that. The good path is breaking the curse of the West, and the evil path is becoming the new lord of the vampires, taking Lazarus' spot. Each choice results in a different outcome for each lady that you have on your shoulder throughout the game, the good ghost of Cassidy or the evil seduction of Tala. Choosing to save the West and being noble results in Tala showing up and taking the soul of Lazarus and becoming the vampire lord herself, which brings you and Cassidy to this otherworldly realm where Tala embraces the full power of Lazarus and fights Jericho to the death. During the fight scene, she is trying to finish the ceremony and put herself completely in power of the new world by crushing poor women periodically while she fights, draining their blood. Defeating her results in the vampire soul being ripped from her body, dropping her on the brink of death to the floor, where she admits to Jericho that she would have loved him if he just joined her side. But Cassidy shows up and says, "Fuck that bitch," and walks Jericho away, kissing him as the curse is lifted from the West and finally being able to put her spirit at rest. Jericho gets on his steed and rides off on his own towards the camera and away from the West. To do what? Who knows? Hopefully not rob another train. Going back to that monumental decision, let's follow the ending if you decided to take Lazarus' power for yourself and become the vampire lord. The soul of Lazarus rushes into your body while Cassidy berates you for taking the dark side and swears that she will break the curse herself. Tala shows up and immediately joins your side, just like she really wanted all along. You make your way to the same ceremonial spot where Tala was in the good ending and attempt to fulfill the destiny of the curse yourself. Except Cassidy shows up in one final attempt to stop the curse and fights you to the death. The crushing of the women still happened during the fight, although this time they're on your benefit and not the enemy's. Defeating Cassidy makes her fall and disappear since she was already dead in a spirit, I guess. She is just dead now. In celebration, Tala and Jericho make out and get handsy, but Jericho, being the vampire lord, now has no room for a boo thing. He bites deep into Tala's neck, draining her of all of her blood and leaving her lifeless on the floor. Oh hey look, he's got two red eyes now. He then rips his Darkwatch badge off, throwing it into the pool of Tala's blood and walks away, hopping on his still zombified horse and this time riding away from the camera, keeping the curse of the West alive. Reviews of Darkwatch at the time were generally pretty good. Most people praised the game for being just downright cool. It didn't innovate any crazy mechanics. In fact, as stated earlier, it ripped off quite a lot of stuff and it did it well, which resulted in a fun game and really cool and unique thematic elements to it. Although there were several named characters in the game, it was Tala that was one of the most notable and praised characters of the whole game. Rose McGowan's voice acting, of course, was praised, and deservingly so. She killed the role, but also many other things about the character received notoriety. Game Daily featured Tala as Babe of the Week, crediting her as, quote, outrageous boobs, saying what's barely covered under her jacket is as big as a threat as her bloodlust, going to say that they can easily overlook her flaws for her beauty. Who cares if she's a murderous woman who betrayed her secret vampire killing co-workers? We all have issues. Tala was an honorable mention in Action Trip's top 10 video game chicks, losing out to the likes of Alex Vance, Ada Wong, and Laura Croft. Man, people were weird when it came to women in video games back in the day, like what the hell? She wasn't just renowned for her animation curves either, she was also the forefront of some controversy due to her being Native American. Games Radar labeled her as one of the top Native American stereotypes as she represents the exotic sex symbol stereotype. But they also said the portrayal of an empowered female who's not afraid to be sexy and go after what she wants is a vast improvement over the depiction of Native American women in Custer's Revenge. Jericho found himself some recognition post-release as well, being listed as one of the most notable vampire characters of all time by Kotaku's Gergo Vaz. Like a lot of games from 2005, there were some talks of making the game into a movie. Names in the business being rumored to be involved with it like Roger Avery, who wrote the film adaptations of Silent Hill, also Glenn Morgan and James Wong, the writers and producers behind the X-Files and the Final Destination movies. However, nothing ever came to fruition. There is no confirmation that the script was ever even written or pitched to a studio. With decent reviews under their belts and obviously strong enough characters and story to incite a movie adaptation, why not carry the game into a sequel? Why didn't High Moon move forward with a new chapter in the Darkwatch book? Well, they tried. Darkwatch was always meant to be a series of games. They wanted to rival Halo in every way, remember? The different games were meant to take place in different time periods, like Assassin's Creed, including Ancient Rome, the Crusades, and World War II. They wanted to build this massive lore of the Darkwatch and its story from conception to now, with monumental events in history being attributed to vampires and the supernatural, and the Darkwatch being there to stop it. Darkwatch 2 was in development at one time between 2005 and 2007, with a technical demo floating around out there showing of its gameplay, but alas, the game was cancelled, condemning High Moon to a life of licensed games like Transformers and Deadpool, never to dabble in an original IP again. Today, High Moon is simply a subsidiary under Activision working on whatever project happens to cross their desk from the big boss. This year though, there's a new game coming out that reminds me a ton of Darkwatch, and I can't help but think it's going to be a spiritual successor in a way, and that game is Evil West, and I can't wait for its release whenever that may be.
Oh, you didn't see that coming.
Darkwatch did so many things right, and it's really no surprise that the game has a cult following even today. It's one of the most recommended games from you guys in the comments, and I'm glad that I took the time out to check it out. And even though I'm bummed that there will never be a sequel or anything to follow up this amazing lore that the studio's made, maybe Evil West can scratch the itch for me, or maybe Darkwatch is meant to be a game of the past. I want to say thank you to my patrons for being some straight up G's. Doug Smith, Anonymous Starkweather, Sofa Pals Productions, Zachary Parkerson, and Crash Bandicoot 25. And also Synthetic Requiem that pledged during the editing of this video. Thank you for all your support, it means the world to me. And thank you everyone else for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you next time. Peace.